Hi, welcome back. And today we're going to talk about embedded options in financial markets, embedded options and the challenges of valuation. For that, with me, I have someone who really needs no introduction, Don Deventer, and someone who has pioneered and built re- uh, fundamental models around interest rates, credit risk, and their interaction. Don, I would like to have you give us a few words about your current role and your research interests now.
Sid, thank you very much. I'm currently co-head of the Center for Applied Quantitative Finance at SAS, which acquired my former company, Kamakura Corporation, in June 2022. Bob Jarrow is nominally co-head, but in reality, as a potential winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, I do whatever Bob tells me to do and try and be as efficient as we can in advancing the state of the art in both the risk analytics embedded in our risk default probability service and in the interest rate and foreign exchange rate simulation that are more directly related to Kamakura risk management.
Thank you. So, without further ado, I will now jump into the key dimensions and key questions. So, the first question now is really, and uh, just to take an overview of embedded optionality in markets, options embedded in things like callable bonds, deposits, and to the extreme, rollover products such as credit cards. To what extent do you think also that we should focus, that everyone should focus on the rationality of the counterparty? What extent does that make an impact?
That's a very, very good question. And I have to make a confession as part of my answer to that question. I've worked as a banker at Security Pacific, at First Interstate, and the infamous Lehman Brothers. And long after I left those three institutions, all of them either went bankrupt or went through forced mergers because the exercise of various embedded options. One class of embedded options exercised against them were the right of commercial real estate loan borrowers to put their properties back to the bank instead of paying on the loan. Another was a home price related put options where the mortgage borrower preferred to send the keys to the bank, keys to the house to the bank instead of paying on their loan. And then finally, this didn't happen to my three former employers, but Silicon Valley Bank, of course, is the perfect example of the exercise of the put option that retail depositors have to take their money back at par at any time. And by the way, that's a liability structure that hardly any regular corporations would dare to issue because those random cash demands on the institution are extremely dangerous when your assets aren't very liquid.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the second question, that is really, to what extent are these embedded options in bank balance sheets accurately and reasonably priced?
That's a really timely question. You and I participated on a webinar for GARP about 10 days ago, and a very interesting split among the 300 participants in a survey. 41% were not using Monte Carlo simulation, and 41% were using Monte Carlo correlation with three or more risk factors in the simulation. And there are really a couple of areas where many banks need to make big improvements. Number one, largely for system reasons, many banks, including several large banks, are not using Monte Carlo at all. Number two, any technique for valuation or risk management involves a credit spread or an option adjusted spread is incorrect. And the reason for that, Bob Jarrow and I pointed out with co-author Jens Hilscher in an article coming out in the Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis in the near future. Contrary to popular belief, although a few academics have recognized this, in bankruptcy, there's no recovery on coupon payments, but there may be recovery on principal payments. And so that very simply means coupon cash flows are subordinate to principal cash flows in a very significant way. But if you discount them at the same yield, you're making a very serious analytical mistake. So that's a key issue. And the third key issue I think people need to focus on more quickly is in a classic article by Bob Jarrow and Kaushik Amin, who's had a long career in fixed income at Citi and other prominent financial institutions. It's called Pricing Options on Risky Assets in a Stochastic Interest Rate Economy. And what that means in plain English is the key element in pricing options. There are really three. Number one, closed form solutions aren't accurate. The assumptions are too simplistic. So you need a simulation. Number two, you should use a simulation that recognizes that the volatility of all the risk factors will change with the level of interest rates. And number three, it's really the correlation between the underlying asset and the option and the level of a risk-free money market fund that are the biggest determinants of valuation. This is a great article, and for a plain English explanation, it's a little longer than this one. Highly recommend Bob's book with Arkadev Chatterjee. That's advanced college level text.
So to what extent, and that brings me to my third question, really, to what extent is IRBB a right step in the right direction, and to what extent do you think quants and modelers and practitioners have taken control over these risks?
Let me be a little bit politically incorrect here and apologize to my late classmate, Philip Turner, who's head of the Secretariat at the BIS. And Philip and I have had hundreds of conversations about a bank regulation, especially from the BIS. And I think Philip, once he retired from the BIS, revealed that he largely agrees with me that bank regulators are well-intended. The regulatory exercise is more political than it is economic. Number three, there's a lowest common denominator constraint that they face. In the US, there's still 4,500 banks left, and someone in each of those 4,500 banks, among those that are subject to regulation, has to understand what's written. And number four, that allows them to get away with formulas that appear from nowhere with no academic references and no explanation as a golden tablet found somewhere in a forest by BIS staffers. So to put it briefly, I think my guide to state-of-the-art risk management is Bob Jarrow and a few other of his very talented colleagues in academia. In my career, I have never learned anything from BIS or Federal Reserve regulations, and I don't expect that to change. So that's a word of caution, and the proof of my orientation is the fact that whether it's Silicon Valley Bank or Lehman Brothers, all those banks were compliant with regulatory constraints at the time. So clearly, it's mandatory, necessary in that sense, but not sufficient to save your institution.
Clearly, you've articulated the many challenges of the and the lack of state of art, if you will, in regulations today. However, in my last question, I really want to move to another dimension besides regulations, is the issue that there is such a variety and diversity of these embedded options, and does that create the challenge? Does that create the challenge that you have to think about pricing, modeling of such a different variety of products and situations and contexts.
One of the constraints working in a big financial institution is both the overwhelming volume of data and variety of products that one has to be, what can I say, at the state of the art when it comes to the analytics involved. And let me pick on mortgages as just one example. Let's say it's 1982 and you've originated a slug of fixed rate mortgages. You end up with a ton of data after the fact on the exercise of the call options that borrowers have in mortgages. Let's say it's 2022 and you start in February and you begin the same process of deriving information about options embedded in mortgages. You're just amazed to find that almost no one is exercising their option to prepay, other than for the usual, relocation or financial distress for other reasons kind of background. And so that's the reason why I think the most important thing to understand completely is what is the rational economic behavior underlying these instruments. And that comes through simulation and measuring the valuation and sensitivity, assuming your counterparty is rational. After that, you can go back and look at the historical data and say, given the dollar value of rational exercise this option, what in fact was the real probability of exercise conditional on that input to the calculation. And if you do that by assuming rational exercise, like take the case of Silicon Valley Bank deposits, you will understand the worst case very clearly, even though that worst case scenario has never happened to your financial institution. Instead, there's this really, really alluring temptation to ignore data that hasn't happened to you personally. And that may be the most dangerous mistake in the field of risk management. So I really encourage people to look at rationality, not bet the bank on how irrational your customers may be without evidence. And so that's the key. Evidence. The data don't lie.
That I think is the central theme of all the message that I think you've always been giving. The data doesn't lie, and you have to build your strategy around evidence. And I think thank you for that, Don. And I think we have had a really powerful message, the challenges around regulation, and some key dimensions and areas that participants need to focus. And finally, of course, the data doesn't lie, and the key story is in the evidence. Thank you.
Well, Sid, thank you very much. It's an honor to work with you on this and any other occasion.
Thank you very much. This was, and so with that, I bring our discussion to a close. And thank you very much, Don.